Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next episode of the Hilltop podcast. I'm joined today by Jim Gerker, former Chaminade High School principal, English teacher, and coach. Thanks for joining me today, Jim. So we've been doing these series of interviews. We're just kind of trying to understand some of the personalities that shaped Chaminade and made the school what it is today. So thanks for joining us, and thanks for sharing your story, first of all.
Thanks.
So let's start at the beginning of your story and get some of your kind of personal background. Are you a St. Louisan? Where'd you grow up? What's your family like,
I was
etc.?
born in St. Louis, moved to Ohio, moved to Minnesota, came back to St. Louis, and walked on campus the first time when I was 8 years old, because my dad was the president of the Alumni Association, and he was setting up for the horse show, which was down on what is now Don Holmes Field. Right. Because they used to have a horse show for fundraising.
Gotcha. So you're a lifelong Chaminade guy, pretty much.
Been around for a while.
Yeah, so what's your family history? Your dad obviously is an alum too?
My dad is an alum. He graduated in '40. He was a salutatorian, three-sport athlete, played at Mizzou in football. My brother went here, several of my cousins went here, and several of my nephews went here.
Very good, very good.
So I was around a long time.
So what, after the horse show at 8 years old, when did you next encounter Chaminade, and what's kind of your next steps there?
I was here off and on throughout my youth until we lived in Florissant at the time, and I went to St. Dismas grade school, and we talked about high school. I didn't really get to choose. My dad said, "You're going to apply to Chaminade," and I did, and I was interviewed by one of the brothers. I don't remember who it was. And I got accepted and came in as a freshman in 1970, when most of my classmates, there were I think 105 in our graduating class, and about 10 of us came in as freshmen. The rest had all been here since 5th grade. We had the last 5th grade class.
Gotcha.
So
I was going to ask about that in terms of the grade levels, but also sort of the boarding at that time. What was the residential component versus approximations of sort of percentages, or how many were locals versus boarders?
The majority of the boarders, as we called them, that are resident students, right. The majority of them were from outstate Illinois, from farm families, and there weren't as many international students nearly as there are now. I don't remember the numbers, probably 50 to 70.
Sure. So about half the class maybe was residential.
Well, that was complete in the dorm.
Oh, I say complete.
In our class, there were probably maybe
about a percentage.
10 or so.
Gotcha. Sure. Makes sense. So what did you do while you were here at Chaminade as a student? What activities were you involved in? What did you do?
I tried to stay out of trouble.
Were you successful?
I was successful. I was a pretty good student, probably a B+ student. I played football my junior and senior year. I played soccer all 4 years. And that was about it in terms of activities. I wasn't involved in any of the clubs, just sports.
Sure. And so what happened after Chaminade for you? Where'd you go? What was the next steps for you?
My junior year, they brought Brother John Wolf in, and he was a counselor. We didn't have a counselor before that. He was the counselor for high school. And I went into his office on the 2nd floor, and he said, "Where do you want to go to college?" And I said, "I don't know. I had a scholarship offer to play soccer at Arkansas. And he said, "You want to go there?" And I said, "I know nothing about Arkansas." And he said, "Then you want to go to the University of Dayton. It's a good Marian school." And I didn't want to go to Mizzou, where my dad had gone. I wanted to go someplace different. So we toured University of Dayton in the spring of my senior year, and I liked it. My parents weren't real keen on it, and I enrolled there in the fall of 71. Fall of 71, yeah.
So just to take a half step back then, the brothers obviously having a big influence on your college decision, certainly from the Marianists. What was the environment here at Chaminade like in that day with the brothers? Obviously the brothers on campus, we only have 2 of them now. I know it was a much bigger presence than that. How was the school different in that way during that time?
There were only a handful of lay teachers. I was taught almost exclusively by religious. And there was no characteristics of Marianist education program. It was just, you caught it. It wasn't taught.
Sure.
And we just, they modeled the Marianist life for us. I didn't know back then that there were these rules that they followed, a prudent tendency toward leniency and things like that. And at times it didn't seem they were very prudent in leniency. But I had some very, very good teachers, very good brothers that taught me when I was here.
Wonderful. So you're at Dayton. Do you know that education is always a part of your future? Do you think that, how does that come into your life plan?
Well, my freshman year, I had no idea what I wanted to do, and my dad said that you're going to go into business, since we had a company, the Ben Gerker company. And I started in the business school, and after one semester I went, this isn't for me, and decided that I needed to really think for the first time in my life as an 18-year-old what I wanted to do with my life. And I thought, well, what do you like to do? And I said, I love to read, I love to write, and who do you most admire? And I thought back to people like Brother Larry McBride and Father Norbert Mellering and others that taught me here, religious, that I thought, I'd like to be like them. Brother Frank Clapp was a very profound influence. Father Seifert, who was a brother at the time, was an influence. And I thought, I think I want to be a teacher. So I called my parents and I spoke to my mom, and she said, that's fine, you have to talk to your dad. And he was a Marine Corps tank commander, so he was a little gruff at times. So I told him, and he said, that if you want to do that, do that. And he said, you won't make any money. And I said, that's okay, I'll be happy. And he said, that's what's most important.
Well, good.
So I began my career in education.
Good. Just a little side note, I know it maybe didn't play a huge part in the rest of your life, but you mentioned the company that your family had, the Ben Gerker company. What did they do, or what did your family
My grandfather started it, and they were manufacturers' representatives.
Oh, gotcha.
And when he passed away, my uncle was working with him, and my uncle asked my dad to come in the business. My dad was a branch manager for Schlitz Brewing, which is why we'd moved around so much when I was little. So my dad and my uncle were partners in that company, and we knew that at some point my cousin, who was my age, and I might be asked to join the company.
Sure.
And eventually I was, but I turned it down. And my cousin did not turn it down, and he is now the sole person in the Ben Gerker company.
All right, well, good for him. So did you play sports at Dayton?
I did. I played soccer. Played soccer for 4 years.
Very good.
Yep.
Very good. What position did you play? What?
I was, well, back then they called it left wing.
Gotcha.
I was a forward. I played varsity for freshman year. I inadvertently made the football team as a kicker. I wasn't trying to. I was trying to help out the kid who was trying out, and the coach picked me and not him, which I felt badly about. And I played that for about 2 weeks and thought, I don't want to be kicker on a football team. So I didn't play soccer my freshman year. I went out my sophomore year, and I was a starter for 4 years, a captain for a couple years, and that kind of stuff.
For you. Good for you. So after Dayton, what's next? Do you get right into a teaching position?
It was real interesting because I graduated in December, so I could stay an extra semester and play 4 years of soccer. And there were no jobs to be found, especially no jobs at mid-year. And I went to numerous school districts and walked into one and went to the counter and told the lady, and she said, well, we have 375 applications for English jobs right now. And I was feeling a little bit defeated. I'd had one offer to teach English at the local prison. Oh. And I thought, maybe I'm going to be doing that. And from the back of this room was a woman at a desk, and she said, hey, English? She says, I have a friend who is a secretary over at West Carrollton School District, and they're looking for an English teacher right now. So I went over there and I applied, and I was one of 10 applicants. And I think I got the job because I had played soccer, and I knew that discipline was very important in the classroom. And so I got hired for that job, started in January of '75, I think it was. And it was a year-round school. Oh. So I was there for a year and a half, but taught the equivalent of 2 school years in a normal school.
Gotcha. And this is in the Dayton area?
This is in the Dayton area. It was a track school. I taught the low track. It was a very, very interesting situation. It was a baptism under fire.
And for just some students who may not understand, or viewers who may not understand, what does that mean, a track school? Can you explain that, or how it especially was set up there?
They based it on standardized testing, and they divided kids up as best as they could into 4 academic groups. And I taught in the blue group, which was the lowest academic group. The reason that there were 4 groups essentially for year-round school was they were overcrowded, and one track was always off at one time.
Interesting. So
I taught 9 weeks on, 3 weeks off.
Interesting.
Year round.
Interesting. So it was a challenge, you said, huh? You got thrown right into the right into the fire. What were some of the challenges? Just at the low learning level?
The kids weren't used to learning. I had taken over for a teacher who had really quit, and she at one point told kids, whoever wants to learn, come up near my desk, the rest of you do what you want. So I had to completely reshape them, and I had very high standards. They weren't used to that. And we ended up liking each other quite a bit, and they achieved really well, and I stayed in touch with a number of them over the years. But my 3rd week of school there, I had a fist fight with a student, or he tried to have a fist fight with me. So there were strange things that happened back then.
A little different than what you maybe had experienced here at Chaminade in your own education.
Yes, quite a bit.
Very good. So is your next step Chaminade? Is that where do you go next?
Yeah,
after
after I'd been at West Carrollton for about 8 months, it was spring, and I came to Chaminade to interview with the brother Fred Weisbrook, and he was the principal at the time. And we had a nice long interview, and he said, okay, I'm going to hire you. I'll be calling you in a week or two. And I didn't hear from him. So I called him. There was no texting or anything. I called him on the phone. I said, Brother Fred, I'm waiting for the contract. And he said, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you didn't have a master's. Because at that time I didn't have my master's. So he goes, we had to hire somebody with a master's. But he goes, we'll keep you in mind for next year. So I didn't get the job. The next year I went back and applied again. Brother Fred had died. Brother Leo Willett was the principal. And when I came into his office, he said, I couldn't find your file, and it's because Brother Fred put it in the active teachers files. Yeah. So if it was good enough for Brother Fred, you're good enough for me. And I said, well, can we interview? And we sat down in front of his desk just like we are, and he said, okay, do you think you're a good person? And I said, I try to be. And he goes, you're hired.
All right.
It was a one-question interview.
That's the easiest interview you've ever had.
It was.
There, very good. Well, did always coming back to Chaminade, was that always part of your hope or plan or dream?
It was always one of my desires, yes. I really loved it here when I was a student. I had such a rich family history that it was a place that I wanted to be. And I missed St. Louis. And all of my friends by that time had moved on, and most of them moved out of Dayton. So I was ready to come back home. And I did, and I enjoyed it from the very beginning. I've taught in almost every classroom in Chaminade Hall.
So what were some of those early years like here at Chaminade? What was the vibe? What was the culture? Was that different from when a few years before when you were a student even?
It was significantly different because the transition, we were in the middle of the transition from mostly religious to mostly lay. And I'm not sure if the brothers had been able to do the kind of work they needed to do to understand who they were hiring. So it was a real mixed bag of skill levels among the teachers. Most were very good, some were just horrendous. And it was difficult for the brothers to understand lay people because they lived a communal life, they lived a very strongly religious life, and the lay teachers, of course, were completely different. So there were some struggles with that for quite a while.
Sure. What was the, you mentioned, I think, earlier that your 5th grade, when you were a student, was sort of the last 5th grade class. Was it 7 through 12 when, Chaminade 7 through 12 when you were teaching at that point?
It was 7 through 12.
Right. And I think you mentioned earlier to me off camera that the 6th grade came in while you were here over that time later.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly when it was. I'm thinking early 2000s, but I'm not sure. Mike Banner had done quite a bit of work. He was the middle school coordinator, and he'd done quite a bit of research and met with the administration and proposed that we return to a 6th grade. Part of it was to compete with Priory, because Priory was starting to re-enroll or to pre-enroll at the 6th grade. Oh, I see. So we cut down that competition a little bit, and we had the space because we had at what that time was called the West Wing. It was before we expanded and put the middle school over there. So he convinced us we should start a 6th grade. I think the first year we were surprised that I think initially we only had like 50 students, and then we ended up with I think 60 total, and it's grown from there.
Mm-hmm, for sure. So what was your early teaching like back here at Chaminade? Different experience than you'd experienced at West Carrollton? What subjects did you teach within the English department? What grade levels? Kind of talk to us about some of those, your early teaching days here at Chaminade.
I was trying to remember what the schedule was. It was a very traditional schedule. I think the classes were 50 minutes long or something like that. I taught 5 sections of sophomore American literature. And in most schools, American literature is taught at the junior year. At Chaminade, for some reason, they taught it at the sophomore year. Taught 5 classes of that, 1 class of junior composition and literature, and 1 class of a senior survey literature, world literature survey course, which was real interesting.
Who were some of the teachers, whether they be brothers or administrators, during that early time that you were back that impacted you, or that, you know, sort of Chaminade legends in some way maybe that have shaped the school?
Bob Johnson, Wayne McKim. Bob was the head of the English department the whole time until he passed. And he really helped shape my my approach to teaching literature at Chaminade. Brother Frank Clapp, who taught me senior English, I patterned myself a bit after him. I tried to do things that were a little bit out of the ordinary, knowing that that's a way to capture kids and keep them interested. I mean, there were just an abundance of good teachers here that I tried to, pick their best qualities from and see if I could implement them myself.
Wonderful. We mentioned you were a coach. Did you start coaching right away once you were back here at Chaminade? And what were you coaching? My
first year I coached B soccer and the junior varsity hockey team. I had never coached hockey. I had played hockey. And Brother John Wolf, who was the varsity hockey coach, needed an assistant. So I said, I'll do it. So I did that. B soccer, obviously, I played and I was thought qualified to coach that. And the man who was the varsity coach, Tim O'Toole, who became a friend of mine, was a little loose in his approach to coaching and teaching. And our B team used to beat the varsity constantly in scrimmages. And at the end of the year, Tim left, and Brother Willett asked me to take over varsity. So from that point on, for about, I think, 11 years, I coached varsity.
Wonderful.
Also coached 8th grade soccer when I left the varsity. We were having a dispute because the school had taken away our family insurance. That was part of the thing that used to was family insurance.
Gotcha.
They took it away, so several of us said in protest we're going to quit coaching.
Gotcha.
So Kevin Brennan quit, and I quit, and a couple other people did. So I coached 8th grade soccer, and then I coached 8th grade basketball, which I'd never done in my life, never played basketball, and that was a lot of fun. I coached that with Mike Francis, a teacher here, and Colin Novak, who was a teacher.
Right, wonderful. So during your 11 years of coaching, how did that go? Do you have success? What were some of your favorite memories from your varsity coaching, at least? Well,
in comparison to Vader's teams, our success was much more limited. I think the highest we were ranked was 8th in the state. We made it to the quarterfinals of state and lost to McClure North. 8th grade soccer, we were undefeated for several seasons, and 8th grade basketball, we were very good. Hockey, we didn't win one game.
Not hockey.
No, we didn't win one game.
It was not Chaminade sports in that point. Am I correct in that during that time frame, varsity soccer would have been a winter sport?
Yeah.
How was that?
No, it had moved to fall.
It had just moved to fall. Gotcha. I'm always intrigued by people playing soccer in the middle of snowstorms.
I played in the winter.
Yeah, you played in the winter.
Yeah, and it was when I played, we had 2 soccer balls. One was rubber for practice, and then 1 game ball. And then my senior year, we got nets, which was a really big deal. Wow. We got a jersey, but no shorts, no sweats, no socks. So all they gave us was a jersey.
Right. It seems wild to me that it used to be
it's a little different.
A soccer player. It seems that it was a winter sport, but all the other things you talk about as well too.
It was horrible.
Some cold days.
It was horrible.
And pounding the ball through snow and such and such. So, when did you then move into the administrative side of things, and how did that evolution take place over your time?
Right after I got married, my wife she's a very ambitious person, and she said you should use your skills more. And I had been voted as the faculty rep for the Principals Council because we were going through some turmoil with our administration, and I sort of liked being in that position. And she said you should go to school. And I had been prompted to go to school by the first lay principal, Mr. Carroll Howell, who was a good friend of mine, and he had sort of pushed me toward the idea. He said either counselor or administrator. I thought I want to be a counselor. So then my wife said, get going. So I went to UMSL, and I went through the secondary administration program, and I got my master's. And soon after I got my master's, Carroll Howell abruptly left, and his assistant principal was a guy named Brother Mark Baer. Was a strange character, and I applied as assistant principal, and several other people did too, and I got the job. And about 2 months into the position, first of all, he gave me no guidance, so I figured things out on my own. And about 2 months into the position, I got called down to the provincial administration, because at the time there were 4 provinces, various provinces in the United States. I got called down to the St. Louis provincial administration, and they asked me questions about Brother Bear, if I knew of any improprieties. And I said, no. I said, I know he likes the kids a lot, and there are a lot of kids always gathered in his office. He's very charismatic. And I said, he does play some favorites, but that's all I know. Well, soon after that, I got called down again, went through the same thing again, really couldn't answer many questions. And in October, I believe it was, he announced he was leaving at the end of the school year. And he was very, very well loved by the kids and by the parents. They had a huge party for him when he left. And meanwhile, Father Seifert called Mike Bander and I in and said, I want you two to be principal. And Bander immediately said, no, I'm not interested in high school at all. So Father Seifert took
and
me.
he had been he was the middle school principal.
He was the middle school coordinator.
I mean, coordinator at that time. Gotcha, right.
So Father Ralph took me out to dinner and essentially said, I really want you to do this. And I said, okay, I'll do it for 1 year, but you have to promise that I can go back to the classroom if I don't like it. And he said, I promise. So from that point on for, I don't know how many years, 14 years or something, I was principal. Every year I had a 1-year contract.
And when was this? When did you start or take over?
I was assistant principal for Bear in 92, 93. And then I became principal in 93. And I was principal through 2006, essentially in November when I was called into Father Seifert's office and he said, I'm tired of working with you. I went, what? I'm tired of working with you because I've hired Dr. Peters to be your replacement. And I said, what's November? And he said, yeah. I went, okay. So I said,
so that happened in the middle of the year? Or not in the middle
November.
of the year, in November,
So
the first portion of the year?
I said, okay, go back to the classroom. And he said, no. He said, you should leave. And I said, you told me I could go back to the classroom 14 years ago. And he said, okay, you can go back to the classroom. And I don't think Dr. Peters liked that very much. So I went back to the classroom, and there's more to it, but I'm going to have to go into all of it.
All right.
Right now.
Sounds good. We can stop there in that way. So what else stands out to you from your time as the principal here? I know a big part of what you did was institute the house system and bring about that. Can we talk about that just a little bit and how that came about?
System first?
The house system and how that came about and where that came from.
Well, Judy Cunningham was one of the secretaries in the main office, and she knocked on the office door one morning before school and said, there's a little gentleman here. She said, a little gentleman would like to talk to you. And I said, who is it? And she goes, I don't know, but he's foreign. Okay. So this man walked in and reminded me a little bit of a leprechaun. And he introduced himself. He's Dr. Brendan McManus, and he was the principal, which is equivalent to a president. So he was the equivalent of Father Ralph's position. He was the principal at St. Joseph's College, Gregory Terrace, Brisbane, Australia. And he had been at an international boys conference in St. Louis, and he became friends with Father Finbar, who was the president of Priory. And he wanted to start an exchange program with Priory, and Father Finbar said, we're not interested, but go to Chaminade, they might be interested. So Dr. McManus sat down and he said, he sort of carved out his idea of what this exchange program would look like. It would be both faculty and a limited number of students, and it would be immersive, and the idea would be that during the exchange, the teachers and the students would gather best practices from the other schools and take them back to their school and maybe start programs there. So I said, I'm interested. It would be 2 students. Their students would come over at the beginning of our school year, and our students were to go over at the beginning of their school year, which is essentially January. And that got nixed right away by both the faculty and by Father Ralph because he didn't want our students out of the classroom for 6 weeks. So we agreed that the first students that we got would go over there for 6 weeks. But before we could get the program started, Brendan McManus took a year sabbatical. So it sort of languished for a year, and meanwhile I connected up with the interim principal, and we got the program going again. I went there and visited, and once I visited, I thought this would be a good idea. Several faculty went over. Michael Francis went over. He was one of the early ones, and he came back raving about the house system. Judy Dubelman, who was a science teacher here, she came back with the same kind of enthusiasm. Then I went over and said, yeah, you're right. And then when Dr. McManus came back, we really got a kick started. They sent over 2 of their very best students. I went to our juniors and I said, who wants to go to Australia for 6 weeks, all expenses paid? And there was pretty much interest. And they said, well, what can we do? And I said, well, you have to go to classes for 6 weeks. And they went, oh. And I said, and it's in the summer. Yeah.
Right.
So I had one applicant.
Gotcha.
So obviously he got chosen. Nice kid, but not one of our stellar students. So the program almost ended the first summer.
Interesting.
So we reshaped it from there. From Terrace, we picked up not only the house system, but experiential education.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
So experiential education, a big thing here at Chaminade right now, but was this kind of the beginnings of that as well, or are there other things happening already?
It was a different concept. I mean, the exchange part was part of experiential education. Sure. We had a exchange program in France, and we had an exchange program in England. But this was just groups of our kids that went over there and essentially toured for a week.
Sure.
This was immersive, where you were actually in classes,
right.
And it was a 6-week period. And with their kids who came over, there were only 2 of them each time. They spent 3 weeks in the dorm and then 3 weeks in a homestay. And our kids, they didn't have a dormitory, so our kids spent 6 weeks in a homestay. So the experiential education part of it was they had an outdoor education center where it was about an hour and a half from campus. It was near a big lake. It was in what they called the bush, so in the country. They had very rustic dorms, and they had a big cafeteria and a big chapel and another meeting building. And then they had high ropes courses and trails and canoes, and that's where they sent their students for retreats. And every student went out there and did high ropes, did water activities and hiking, and then essentially camped in these rustic cabins. And I thought that was a really great idea, especially for boys. So that was my first push when I came back. I said, we should look for property. And at one point, I had Father Ralph halfway convinced. And he and I and the business manager, Tom Wojciechowski, and I think Mike Bander, went out and visited a property in Potosi that had about 120 acres. And it had a number of buildings on it. And I thought we were really close to actually buying it. And Father Ralph said, no, I don't want to do that. So that type of experiential education ended. And it sort of was sad in my mind, because we were spending a lot of money for retreats and sending kids to different places on retreats. And I thought we could also rent this out to other schools who were desperately looking for places off campus for retreats. But it never materialized.
Sure. So is the house system, in your opinion, say the thing you're most proud of from your time as administrator here, or time at Chaminade?
I'm very proud of it. I'm probably most proud of the faculty. I think we had, and there still is here, a very strong core faculty. I don't know how many that I hired are still here, but I think maybe half. I don't know.
Sure. Let's delve a little bit deeper into that in terms of just the curriculum. Not that we have to get into the exact nitty-gritty, yeah. But what sort of curriculum advances did you help institute, did the school institute kind of over those years, and how it grew? I
would have to give the credit there to Dr. Krallman. She was this, what do we call them, associate principals for curriculum and development, and she did that. She greatly expanded our AP programs, our college credit programs, and I think really tightened the curriculum and made it more challenging. And I was just there to help her any way I could, but she's the one that really spearheaded that.
Sure. So one of the other big things that we talked about off camera, I know, is you were involved in the laptop integration and one-to-one laptop program. Is that correct? Tell us where did that come from, and was that happening in other schools, or was Chaminade kind of out in the front of things?
To the best of my recollection, there were a couple of things I was interested in at the time. I mean, I did a weekly newsletter, and to put that newsletter together, I tried to put in some things that were educationally innovative or interesting. And so I had to do my own research, which I did. And two concepts that sort of piqued my interest were computers, one-on-one computers, and the structure of the schedule. So I began to investigate block scheduling and one-on-one laptop programs, neither of which were in St. Louis at the time to my knowledge. And we talked about it a lot on the administration, and Father Ralph agreed to fund 10 laptops for loaners to the faculty. And we did that, and I don't remember, Scott, I don't remember what they were. I don't remember what the brand was, but they had a bag, and the faculty could check them out and really liked them quite a bit. And we continued to investigate what the cost would be to go with a one-on-one program. And Tom Wojciechowski, again the business manager, and Lee Tilley had a lot to do with the important technical and financial side of it. And with their expertise and their help, we were able to start this program, which was, I think, if not the first in St. Louis, among the first. And I do know that there were quite a few schools that came to us afterwards and studied us to see if they could start it. And the same with the scheduling, which met with quite a bit of resistance. Our schedule at the time was, I thought, was harried. I mean, it was maybe 50 minutes long, and you were constantly running from the kids from class to class to class to class. So we went with the block schedule. It was an alternating block, 4 classes one day, 4 the next. And that had both advantages and disadvantages. I don't think that the math people liked it a whole lot. The science people did, because it gave them more time for labs. So there was a lot of debate about it. I had been pushing for the block schedule that Vianney went with, was 4 classes one semester, 4 the next. And that met with a fair amount of resistance, most notably from Brother Epi, who was always vocal in his support and in his disagreement, and in a very good way. Not in a confrontational way, but because he's a very, very smart man. So I remember we were in the library on the 2nd floor, and we were talking about the block schedule, and I said I would like to go with the semester 4-1 for the next semester. And he stood up and gave a very cogent argument why we shouldn't do that. And it moved the faculty. So we went with the alternating block. And then since then, I think it's been changed quite a bit for various reasons.
We're still having those same debates here about scheduling, and I don't think that'll ever stop here or anywhere else. I'm sure there's always people with
we were one of the first
opinions.
to go with block. And again, we held a thing, I remember the 2nd year, called a block party, and invited schools from the St. Louis area. And we had quite a few schools that came in to meet with our faculty and to talk about the pluses and minuses of a block schedule.
Back to the laptops just for a moment. What were some of those early challenges? I'm sure they're the same as now, kids using them for things they shouldn't be doing or whatever, but what were some of those hiccups, or maybe some of the successes that happened right away?
One of the successes I felt was testing, that you were able to build a data bank online, and I thought testing was a lot better. But it required the technology to work, and there were times when the technology didn't work or things went down. If it was during exams, it was a nightmare. The biggest headache that we had as administration was that and again, for hindsight's 2020, we said no students can leave their laptop bags unattended at any time. Well, when you get 300 kids coming down for lunch, they're not going to go to their locker, wherever that might be, and try to jam that laptop bag in those small lockers. So they would come down and just throw them in the atrium. And every bag was a black Chaminade bag. And we kept saying, don't do that, don't do that. So eventually we started collecting the bags and charging them $1 for the missions to get it back after lunch. And that met with some resistance. But it took a while to train them not to just leave their bags, because we thought there'd be theft. In fact, I think in the time I was here as principal, we maybe had 1 or 2 laptops get stolen. So theft wasn't an issue.
Interesting. Let's talk about something we haven't talked about at all yet, but we're certainly related to Chaminade, is the evolution of kind of the physical campus. Were there changes? You mentioned a little bit earlier in terms of the West Wing and such. How did the campus evolve over your time over here, while you were here?
Well, while I was here, gosh, what things happened. Waldron Hall had been a dormitory for seniors, and that was closed, and the seniors moved back over to Frischie. And the brothers moved into Waldron. When they built the West Wing, the first West Wing, which had 7 classrooms, I think. It was a very strange, had 3 classrooms one side, an empty hallway in the back, and a huge storage room in the middle. It was a very odd.
So, and just so everyone understands, and even me, this was before my time, this was sort of the first edition of what became the full middle school. So it was on the back of Chaminade Hall, but it was sort of a small addition to Chaminade Hall, but then was later expanded into what we now know as McBride Hall, the middle school wing.
And to put that building in, that's where the maintenance building was, the maintenance garage they called it. It was a 2-story brick building. They had to tear that down and move that down to the bottom end of campus, and they built the new maintenance building. Eventually, what we called the West Wing was expanded into what you call McBride Hall, and the middle school moved over there. And that meant that the 3rd floor was now vacated and could be used for classrooms. The library was relocated from the north end of the 2nd floor to where the library is now, and that opened up a huge space. And there were other domino effects that occurred. We were able to use not Canning Hall, Frischie Hall. We were able to use Frischie Hall, which is where we moved guidance because they had separate offices there. And then guidance eventually moved back over to where campus ministry was at the time.
Gotcha.
So there are all sorts of different changes that occurred.
Sure. But the middle school at that time or before that was located on the 3rd floor?
On the 3rd floor.
That was the middle school spot. And is the 4th floor classrooms at that point, or was that still residential?
There were.
Because originally the 4th floor was residential space, wasn't it? Long ago at least?
There was. It was. When I was here as a student, the 4th floor at one end was the band room, and at the other end were art classrooms and a technical drawing classroom. And then all the middle section of the 4th floor were small, they called them cells. There were small rooms where the brothers initially lived years ago. And by that time, a few of the cells had been combined to make a couple of small classrooms, but while I was principal, we tore the rest of them out and made more classrooms up there.
Interesting.
And sealed up some of the doors.
Interesting. So let's talk about some personalities. So you've mentioned some throughout your time. Who are some of those impactful personalities, whether while you were here as a teacher or administrator, or even as your time as a student, and what did those people, how did those people impact you, and how do you think they impacted the Chaminade campus and community as a whole?
I had I thought, a very good administrative team that I worked with. Dr. Krauman was very good at what she did. She didn't stray out of that. She was not one to supervise sporting events, for example. That was done by the associate principal for student development. My first one was Brother Richard Villa, who some of the longtime teachers remember here. He was very high energy. I really wanted a religious in that position. I was always seeking to get religious if I could hire them. And he did a very good job, but he was so driven that he sort of lost perspective. And he was ready to move on anyway. So when he left, I hired Tom Fiala, who had been here twice as a teacher. He had left, he'd gotten a law degree, he was a lawyer, he came back again, started our computer program, left, and I hired him as assistant principal. And he was assistant principal for several years. And at that point, I needed an athletic director. So I asked him to move to athletics. He was a very, very good coach and just loved athletics. So he became the athletic director, and I hired Mike Loyette away from Vianney, where he was an administrator there, and he was an outstanding assistant principal. And really, I mean, he and I worked very, very closely together along with Stephanie. So in terms of administration, and Mike Bander had been a long time middle school coordinator. When I became principal, I said, you're now middle school principal. It's a more accurate title for you. And he had helped build the middle school. Commander Bander did a great job with the middle schoolers. He and I disagreed in the way that he wanted the middle school to be pretty much totally separate from the high school. I wanted them integrated. And that was one of the issues when we started the house system, is he wasn't going to do it in the middle school. And Father Ralph was one that said, no, we're going to do it school-wide. So
makes sense. How about one event, sounds like you were here for, was say 9/11 on campus, or any other sort of big kind of national moments that you can remember, and how they maybe impacted the campus community, if there is anything, I don't know.
Well, 9/11 was an important one, obviously. We had the Australians here,
Oh,
and
interesting.
I was up in the second floor classroom that's next to the elevator. I was at 211, or I don't know what it is.
Sure.
But, before school, and the library was still at the end of the hall, and some kid came in and said, Mr. Gerker, there's a plane just ran into New York Twin Towers. And I went, oh man. And I'm thinking, you know, Piper Cub or something.
Sure.
And it was only soon after that, right after homeroom had started, that we saw the degree of what had happened. And immediately I thought of the Australian students and got a hold of their parents, and their parents were just petrified.
Sure.
Because in their mind, the whole country was under attack.
Sure.
And we didn't know when and if they were going to get back.
Sure.
And the administration immediately met, the principal's council met, and we sat in my office and we watched the things unfolding on television. And at some point that morning, I met with Father Ralph, and we got on the intercom, and I believe I talked to the kids about how tragic it was, and I asked the teachers please to turn the TVs off and continue teaching. And told the secretaries, any parent that wants to come get their sons can do so. No
Sure.
Issue with their record or anything. And we had a number that came and got their kids. And Father Ralph then led the school in a prayer, and we got through the day. Other goofy things, I had two seniors that on senior skip day decided they were going to climb the side of the University Club tower.
Oh, all right.
Because they were excellent climbers, and they scaled that, and that made the media. And that was my last year, and it was the spring, and I got numerous phone calls that were about 80% from alumni who were saying, that is so cool, that is so cool, and another 20% who said they should be expelled immediately.
Right. Sure.
So I called the parents in, I talked to them. The kids spent the night in jail by the parents' choice. And then they had community service to do. They couldn't participate in graduation activities. And that was in opposition. Dr. Peters went up to him. He was going to be the new principal, and he said, I'd have expelled you right on the spot.
Gotcha.
I thought, well,
all right.
you can do that next year.
Next year.
Can't do it this year.
Interesting.
That was a big one. One of the ones that I remember the greatest was Dr. Cromman called. Her office was across the hallway from main office at the time. And she called me into her office, and there was a junior student that was sitting there. And I said good morning to him, and she goes, I'll call him Tom. It wasn't Tom. And she said, Mr. Gerker, Tom here wants you to know that he's going to leave campus. He has a gun. He's going to leave campus and kill himself. And I said, well, you can't do that. So I brought him over to my office, and I had a table in there, and he sat down at the table, and he said, well, Dr. Cromman has to be here, or she'll call the police. So we called her over, and she sat on the other side of the table, and we talked for a while, and I said, you know, first of all, I'm not going to let you out of here. I'm not going to let you harm yourself. And he said, well, you can't call anybody. I said, well, I have to call your parents, and I can't call my parents. And I said, well, I don't even believe you have a gun. And he reached in and he put it with .357 Magnum.
Oh, wow.
And I went, I'd not been faced with this before. I said, why don't you put it on the table? So he set it down on the table, and I just sort of put my arm around him, and periodically I'd shove the gun a little bit further toward Dr. Cromman, who wouldn't touch it. And I'm thinking, take the gun and put it away. So eventually we called in Mr. Layette, and eventually Father Ralph came in. Mr. Layette said, I have to go back out and get things going in school. And this kid said, promise you won't call the police, because I promised. And I thought, get out there and call the police. Right. Well, he didn't, because he said later, because I promised him I wouldn't. So eventually I signaled to my secretary, she called the police. Father Ralph and I were still in there. Dr. Cromman had left. We pushed the gun away. And the police came and arrested him.
Wow.
And he had a parent who was very driven, and nothing was good enough. If the kid didn't get hundreds, it wasn't good enough. And he was a good kid. We had to expel him, which was not easy, and Father Ralph and I really were leaning toward keeping him, but we realized we couldn't.
Sure.
Had to send out information to parents, and he's married and very successful.
Doing well.
Yeah.
Well, good for him.
Yeah.
And good for you. Wow, that's a heck of
That was one of the scarier things I
can
ever
imagine.
faced.
Yeah.
There's lots of others, but those are some of the more prominent ones that stick in my memory.
Well, I just want to wrap up and kind of hoping to wrap up all of these interviews that we do with kind of coming back to what's at the heart of Chaminade in terms of Estovir, our school motto. What does Estovir mean to you, and how have you experienced Estovir both throughout your life as a child, back to when you're 8 years old, to through all your time here as a student and then a teacher and administrator? What does Estovir mean to you?
It's interesting. When I was in Australia and I was trying to present to the parents, there were about 300 parents in their auditorium, I was trying to present to them what the Marianist charism is and what the Chaminade motto Estovir means. And I said, easily translate, it's be a man. But I said that means 1,000 million things to 1,000 million people. So I said, to me, it has to be laid over the top of the Marianist charism. And I tried to give them the best example I could in terms of they're a Christian Brothers school. The Irish Christian Brothers, not the English Christian Brothers, but I said, you are soldiers for Christ, and your version of be a man is different than the Marianist version, which is a bit more compassionate. My belief in being a man in the Marianist charism is it's a blend of both the stereotypically manly qualities and the stereotypically female qualities, that you also have to be compassionate and kind and forgiving and strong and moral. So that's how I've tried to live my life. When I left Chaminade under strange circumstances and I got hired at Parkway South, I thought, I know what Estovir means to me. I'm just going to continue to administrate in the same mode I administrated here, to follow the Marianist charism. And I did that, and it was really successful. I couldn't articulate that,
sure,
but it was a little bit of a different model for the kids. They weren't used to administrators being compassionate and actually listening and being kind and forgiving, and I think it worked really well for me there.
Good. Well, thank you for all your contributions over the years, and thank you for joining us here today and sharing your story. And thank you all viewers for joining us as well on our latest episode of the Hilltop Podcast.